I am Kathleen Browning's daughter, youngest daughter, and me and my sister Susan have been doing genealogy for about 30 years. And I had a party for my father when he would have turned 100, and my mother and her twin sister's 100th birthday is on June 10th. And I was trying to think of what kind of a party I should have for them. And it dawned on me that I should update the Murphy book. And the Murphy book is a genealogy oral history that was given by my great-grandfather to his son Timothy Murphy in 1935. And it was a little bit of a story from Rosscarbery in Ireland, but it was mostly just the family line. And I said, I'm going to update that book, and then we're going to have a reunion of all the Murphys. So that started about a year ago, and the book itself came on to a whole new life out of its own. I decided that I wanted to write stories about the people in the family. If I could find out enough information about them, I couldn't do it about everybody, but if I could find anything out, I wanted to do that, and it was extraordinary about what I found. I found that we had 68 veterans, 4 that were killed in action. And my father was the only POW. We had 4 couples where both the wives and the husbands were in World War II, and they met in World War II. We have one of my uncles, the one that wrote the original Murphy book at 1935. He was in the Spanish-American War. And when he got out, he was a Secret Service for Teddy Roosevelt and his family for 3 years. And I have his log of those 3 years. We found another gentleman, he died at 25, and I was like, but Ancestry, which normally tells you obituaries or military records or what have you, pops up, and nothing was popping up, and I'm like, he was 25 and it was in the 1940s, so I had to do a little bit more investigating, and I found that this man, he was 25, and he was a commander of 300 people, and he was dropped off at Normandy a week before the Normandy invasion, and he was told to bring his troops through a known sniper field. They were doing that, he got shot in his stomach, and he's like, go back, save yourselves. They didn't want to, but he said, no, I'll get a friendly medic that'll pick me up. They retreated, and he saved all 300 lives. They found him in the field 2 days later. He bled out from the stomach wound. His first and only child was born a month to the day after he died. And because he was only 25, a lot of the troops that he commanded were peers, they were age. And there was a lot that were very traumatized by his death. And there was a story that one of them reached out to a French woman and said, you know, they buried him in a temporary grave. Can you find out where he is and please pay my respects to him? And this woman called she was in France, and she was called the Mother of Soldiers. And this woman, and she couldn't have been very old because she had toddlers, she found the grave and she took a picture of her 3-year-old hugging the cross. They sent that to his mother and said, your son is not forsaken, that somebody's here praying and taking care of his grave. Years later, we didn't even know this, But because he saved those 300 troops, we had taken over a camp in Germany in the war, and they named it Leyden Barracks, named after him. It had the largest military mall in all of Europe. It had an elementary school, a junior high, and a high school, all named after him for his sacrifice. And then later we did give it back to Germany, and they still kept the name Leydenville. So it was stories like that, you know, amazing history and just the service of the people. So I did decide to make a big deal out of the veterans, and I made a big banner with each individual picture, their awards, what branch, when they served. And we had one active military here that they lost their father last year, and God love him, he's a young man of 23, I believe, but family means so much to him. And he asked for to be able to come up here, and he was granted that request. A lot of preparation. I wrote 2 books, one for the O'Kane family, one for the Murphy family, both my mother's mother and father's side. We're having a cemetery walk tomorrow that includes 14 stones with numerous amount of people that have passed. I didn't count that. But yesterday I planted forget-me-not flowers at each of the graves. I mapped out the graves, the easiest way to walk without having to walk back and forth, back and forth. And I'm giving those, I handed that out to people. And then tomorrow afternoon after that, we're doing a burying of a time capsule. And in it we'll put one of the Murphy books that I wrote, a COVID mask, a picture of my 9-year-old granddaughter on the stairs of the house that James Murphy built in 1888. He was born a year before the famine in Ireland. And for him to come here and survive the famine, him and his wife, and then to come here, and in America it was Irish need not apply, but somehow he had $100 to buy land in 1877, and he built the house in 1888. So the owners of that house now are allowing us to plant the time capsule. And today's also the coronation of King Charles III. So, you know, I know it's not as big of a deal as the Murphy reunion, but we will clip out the headlines and we will put that in the time capsule as well. Because this was a trigger of my mother's 100th birthday and her twin sister, I'm having my granddaughter be the one to dig up the time capsule in James Murphy's yard in 2062 when it's my 100th birthday. Hopefully she'll have a party then. And hopefully I have saved her a lot of work. She'll only have to do 40 years of work versus how much I had to do up to 1935. So that's what we're hoping. And the big thing is, you know, those that have gone, they were only dead if we let them be. You keep them in your heart, and every time I learn something new about one of them, I become closer to them and I get to know them. I know the history that they lived through, and the famine or war or whatever, the moving over from the seas and never seeing their parents again, and knowing they'll never come home. So all of those things make up who they are. And you know, the pictures, and when there's very few pictures. My grandmother, her mother died when she was only 4. And she was raised by a bunch of men because they had 7 brothers. And she had one other sister that was 4 years old at the time. And my mother was 13 when her mother passed away. So I really missed having a grandmother. And I wanted to know as much as I could about her so she could become alive to me. And my hope is now that we have genealogy that's easier to access, that if they could, our descendants could read as much as they can, and now they have videos of us and pictures and stuff that we, when we die, can stay alive for them, and still have relationships with them. And then hopefully in heaven we'll all know each other already, because I tease with my sister, it's like we know more dead people than we know alive.
So may you talk about today?
Today was fascinating. We had 100 Murphys. A lot of us, you know, have gone by the wayside, and we only focus on our immediate families. But I took it from my great-grandfather that came here. He was born in 1844. Him and Johanna, his wife, they had 10 children. And they were a bunch of mini reunions under the great-grandfather. There was a lot of us that didn't know each other or knew of, you know, their parents or whatever, but not each other. So this was a really great awakening. And you know, it's funny because I spent 30 years doing the genealogy, and my daughter gave me a sign for Christmas that said, I study dead relatives and occasionally a live cousin. And that was funny, but it was really unique because to do this book, I had to interview so many of my cousins. And I would never have talked to them in my entire life if it had nothing to do with making this book. And I'm like, I have neglected living relatives that I have in lieu of studying the dead ones. And I don't regret learning about the dead ones, but it just like knocked me. And I have become friendly with so many of, all of them really, closer to some than others. And it's amazing, out of all of us, there's a whole slew of us that has felt compelled about the Murphy family and where they came from in Ross Carberry, that we all, without even knowing each other, have gone back there. It's just amazing that, you know, great-grandparents that you never knew, you could be so indebted to coming here. And I mean, my husband and I got our Irish citizenship because the first time I went there, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I just felt like I was overcome by, this is the view of the water, the ocean, that my great-grandfather had to see probably the night before he left, knowing he would never get back there. He wouldn't see his parents again, and there was no promises of where he was going. And, you know, that strength, and it's just amazing. We do owe a lot of gratitude to them. So I pledged to him that I was going to bring him back home. I was bringing his kin back home, and that's why I got my citizenship.
What lesson do you think stood out the most from those in the grave?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. One is Johanna. Johanna died at 42 years old of a blood clot. I'm a birth doula besides being a realtor, and the first thing that hit me was, I wonder if she was pregnant. And you know, my grandmother was only 4, so she didn't have many memories of her mom, and I never met my grandmother. So, but doing this, I got to talk to relatives of Johanna's older children, and they passed on the story that Johanna was pregnant when she died. So that was interesting. You know, it's just the hardship that they had to have. I went into the home that they built yesterday, and the owners were telling me that half of the kitchen was a summer kitchen, and one of the bedrooms upstairs was a summer bedroom, and I wasn't sure what that meant. And what it meant was there was no insulation and no heat whatsoever in that part of the house. So they would only use it in the summer, which I thought that was interesting. And they heated the whole house with a potbelly stove in the living room. And you know, just the fact that and they raised 10 kids in this house. This is a small house. They had to just pull up a rug. I mean, they all couldn't have fit in, 3 bedrooms. And even after my grandmother got married, she lived there with her husband for a couple of years. So the kids kept coming home. I just don't know how they did it. But they did a great job, my great-grandfather and all of his sons, raising my grandmother and her sister. But it wasn't easy back then. It wasn't easy. They've gone through the famine. They've gone through so much.
What would you like to say that I didn't ask you, Auntie Ann?
I'm not afraid to die. I'm just afraid of being forgotten, because almost like that movie Coco, it's like you are living as long as you're being remembered.